Hey guys, Mr. Poki here. I'm back with another video. So today's content is going to be very interesting because there's a lot of testing done by the CN bros to actually find a conclusive evidence on how this mechanic actually works, right? It is with great pleasure from my end to actually be able to translate and summarize all this for my viewers over here. And I think it's a very interesting mechanic that may see more users in the future, but as of right now, from what we know, Welt is the only unit that makes use of this mechanic. And what mechanic am I going to be referring to? It is the power of AV cutting, which essentially means cutting in between your enemy's turn. So without further ado, let's get into today's content. Welt's out mechanic, or rather specifically AV cutting. What does this term actually refer to, right? Now, Welt is the only unit in the entire game that can enable our entire team to cut an enemy's 2-turn combo, right? And what I mean by cutting an enemy's 2-turn combo is, what this refers to is, I'm pretty sure everybody has played a lot of MOC or Simulated Universe, and you would have noticed that some of the elite units or bosses, they will have this 2-turn like instantly back-to-back move, right? Like they will use a skill, and then they'll use another skill immediately after that. There is no delay, no actually, it's as if like they all have like a mini brough, letting them go twice, right? So a lot of these units, these skills could include a power-up, a buff, a special mechanic of some sorts, and then followed by an attack, or vice versa, right? So this is essentially their 2-turn combo. And right now, in our current game, the only way you can cut this 2-turn combo is either you out, or you use Welt's ultimate. But the problem with outing is, this only affects your one unit that's outing. Immediately after the unit outs, the rest of the team will still go after the enemy's turn. But for Welt is the only unit in the entire game that can allow our entire team to cut through the enemy's 2-turn combo with his ultimate. Because the ultimate, not only does it decrease speed, it also delays action value. No other unit in our game right now have delayed action value unless you play a lot of Simulated Universe, you get some sort of weird buff or curios. In terms of normal gameplay, in MOC, Welt is the only unit that can do this. That's why this is so unique to Welt, and why I thought that it's not really well covered enough by content creators. So how does this mechanic actually work? So once afflicted with his with his out debuff, if the rest of Welt's team is close enough to the AV behind the target that's being pushed back, then everybody will have a turn before the target, effectively cutting its turn. So what I refer to this is, let's say right now is the enemy unit's turn, and the rest of the units are at 50 AV, right? After the enemy casts a move, and then he's gonna take his second turn, you press your Welt's ultimate here to effectively push back the enemy's action values. If the action value being pushed back is more than 50, which means it will go behind the rest of the team. When that happens, then everybody else in the rest of the team can therefore effectively go before the enemy unit, right? So that's what this means by team cutting, right? Cutting its turn, cutting its action value, right? But with this specific mechanic, there's actually a lot of questions that is not really discovered or exposed or talked about in the community, right? Such as, most importantly, whether the action's turns are completely reset or just delayed. And I'll be talking about this later on, right? And also, do you have extra pushback if you were to time Welt's ultimate on the enemy's break, right? Do they stack well with each other? Are they multiplicative or are they additive? So I hope that with this video, I will be able to address some of these questions regarding action cutting with Welt's ultimate. Right, so for the first question, right? Is Welt's action value delay on a 2-turn combo considered as a complete reset, or is it just considered as a delayed action, right? To understand this question, we first have to understand how an enemy AI's skill cycle actually works. So for any enemy unit in the entire game, be it a boss unit, elite unit, or even like the mobs, they will always have a specific amount of skill cycles that they will follow with their AI, right? They'll cast their skill 1, 2, 3, and if it's gonna be 1, 2, 3, there's gonna be 1, 2, 3 every single time. Right, so this is essentially what it means by the skill cycles. So in our testing here today, CN bros have done it on Kafka's skill cycle. So from their control group testing, which is going to be this entire document here, the first 2 columns is their control group testing. So they have discovered that for Kafka's skill cycle, just to heads up, this is only for Kafka's phase 1, not including her phase 2 or phase 3. This is strictly phase 1. She's going to be casting skill 1, 2, 3, 1, and 3, 4. So that is her full skill cycle, split amongst 6 different actions, but each action is going twice per turn, right? Because Kafka goes 1, 2, and then 3, 1, and 3, 4. So that's how it works. So after casting 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, the next skill cycle is going to repeat again. So it's going to be back to 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4. So that is how skill cycle works in this. And this is the same for any other unit. They all have their unique skill cycles. When do they cast the skills? Exactly, it's all like clockwork, right? If nothing cuts their action value, if nothing delays them, then they're always going to be using these skills unless some specific criteria are met. So this is going to be the case. So for translation purposes, I'm going to be labeling the 4 different skills as 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Just like I've done over here. And 4 is the one that we need to be wary of, because 4 is Kafka's AoE grenades, which does a ton of damage. So it will be in our team's best interest to try and delay 4 as much as possible. With that out of the way, let's dive into whether Welt's ultimate is a complete reset or is it just a delayed action, right? So complete reset essentially means is if after Welt casts his ultimate and Kafka goes back into 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, this means that the cycle has been reset, right? She's no longer going to be casting 4 immediately in the next action, right? But if Welt's ultimate did a delayed action, which essentially means if Welt casts his ultimate in a turn where Kafka would have cast her ultimate next, or rather cast her skill 4 next, then this means that her action has been delayed and there is no skill order reset. Like she's still doing the same skill cycle. With that out of the way, let's look into the findings done by our CN bros, right? So for our first testing, which is actually the same as the 3 and 4 column, they're both the first testing, right? The CN bros cast Welt's ultimate after Kafka's 5th action, which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 3. When she casts 3, and then they cast Welt's ultimate here, which is going to be the Q. What is the findings from this? Well, they found that when Welt casts his Q, after Kafka casts her 5th action, which is a 3, Kafka will immediately follow with a 4, which is her AoE grenades. This means that this is a delayed action, right? There is no skill reset, she still resumes her normal cycle. But the turn after that, there's a little bit of a change. Because I'm not sure if you can see exactly over here, because after the 7th action, which is the 4 over here, she went back into 1, 2, 3, 1, 3. Which is different from 1, 2, 3, 1, 4. Right? So this means that Welt still managed to cancel out what essentially is one of Kafka's AoE ultimate. But for the other 2 testings, where Welt casted his ultimate earlier, in between Kafka's 3rd action or her 1st action, then you can see that her ultimate, or rather her 4th skill, is nowhere near to be found, and it got pushed back all the way until her next full skill cycle, right? So this is her 1st skill cycle, which is the box over here, and cells highlighted in light yellow is the 2nd skill cycle, right? So you can see that if Welt casts his ultimate too late, then Kafka will be having delayed action, but she will still cast her ultimate afterwards. But then she will remove the ultimate cast on her 2nd skill cycle. And when going into her 3rd skill cycle, that's where, regardless when you cast Welt ultimate, be it late, middle, or early, she will be completely reset by the 3rd skill cycle onwards. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4 every single time after that, right? So that's essentially how it works. For more detailed explanation, or if you don't really understand what I'm saying over here, feel free to take a look at what's been discussed on the Google Sheets. I'm pretty sure you can find the explanation there. And if you still can't understand, drop by my Discord and I'm glad to answer the question for you. But the summary is, in conclusion, it would be ideal to cast Welt's ultimate earlier so as to delay Kafka's skill 4 as much as possible, right? However, the total amount of skill 4 casted in our entire simulation here is exactly the same, right? He still managed to shave off 1 skill 4. It's just depending on whether the skill 4 comes immediately afterwards or the skill 4 goes into the next skill cycle. That's the gist of casting Welt's ultimate timing affects what action the enemy is going to do next. Alright, so for the second testing that we're going to be doing here today is, what if the enemy has a specific threshold, a criteria for him to cast his skill? What I mean by this criteria, we can look into our example today, which is the Frigid Prowler, right? So Frigid Prowler, which is essentially the Ice Fatty, the guy that summoned the mobs, he has a unique mechanic where after summoning his mobs, right, his next skill cycle will consume a mob. Do you guys remember? Like when he summons the little soldiers, if he can eat the soldier, if there's soldiers for him to eat, he will 100% eat the soldier. And the action of eating a soldier must come on the 2nd turn. He will never ever eat soldier on the 1st turn. It will always be on the 2nd turn. So these are some of the special AI's restriction that they have placed on Frigid Prowler, and we can see how Welt's ultimate affects the AI or the skill cycle of this unit, right? So in the table over here, it is also very, very complicated, and I won't be really bothering explaining what it essentially means, because it's very similar to Kafka, right? You just have to know when Welt casts his ultimate and what are the specific actions that boss takes after that. So our table over here, what it essentially translates into is that Frigid Prowler does not have a very fixed sequence, but it's a conditional sequence on whether he could eat a mob. If there are no mobs for the Frigid Prowler to eat, then he'll always cast his skill 1 again, but before being able to cast skill 4. His skill 1 is summoning the mobs, and his skill 4 is eating the mobs, right? If he does not have any mobs to eat, he will always cast skill 1 again, but if he already has mobs to eat, then he will not cast skill 1. So there isn't a very fixed order for Frigid Prowler. It really depends on whether the guy has mobs or not, right? And because of this, it is much easier to summarize, despite the table looking like a lot more complicated. I mean, yes, it was very difficult for the CN bros to actually digest this, but once they actually digested it, it is much more straightforward than Kafka skill cycle. What this boils down to, the summary is, when Frigid Prowler's action value is delayed, right? Which basically means if Welt casts his ultimate in between Frigid Prowler's action, right? Any of his 2 actions, Frigid Prowler will never ever cast eat mob or eat his soldiers on the first turn, right? Because this is one of his conditions, right? He will never ever eat on his first turn. And because of this, his AI will force him to reset. So he will cast skill 2, which is the Frigid Ice Storm or something like that, consecutively, right? He'll cast it twice. But most of the time when you play against Frigid Prowler, if you don't have Welt, you will notice that he will never ever cast this Frigid Windstorm twice consecutively. But because of Welt, he will now force himself to correct his skill cycles by casting his AoE twice, and this will allow him to use his skill back into the original skill cycle again. If Welt's ultimate is cast against a target with some sort of conditional restrictions, such as the target have to use a specific skill at a specific turn, then they will always force itself to correct it at the earliest possible time, right? So that is the second finding for Welt's ultimate. So with these 2 examples explained, the final summary is Welt's ultimate cutting does provide the team a massive turn cycle benefit, because no matter where you want to place Welt's ultimate, right, you're essentially reducing one of the boss actions, forcing the boss to go back into its skill cycles. Hey guys, Editor Pookie here from the future. So after explaining Welt's ultimate and how it cuts skill cycle, it also brought to my attention that he really is the only person that can actually do this, because even though you can technically cut an enemy's 2 turn cycle with your unit's ultimate, but it doesn't delay their actions. So the enemy's turn will always follow their original skill cycle, and therefore Welt is the only unit in the entire game that can actually delay an action skill and therefore change their skill cycles. They have to cut one of the actions for it to go back into the skill cycle. So in Welt's case, it can definitely help your team in terms of survivability, because sometimes it means delaying a huge AoE ulti, or cancelling a key skill, or cancelling a buff, all this kind of stuff for the enemy to reset its AI. So Welt's ultimate has a very interesting mechanic, and I hope that the game will allow us to have more units that introduces a very similar mechanic such as Welt's ultimate over here. However, it is not completely broken or overpowered, because it doesn't cancel the skill outright. Like the enemy will still cast a skill, but it's just a little bit delayed. So I think Welt's ultimate is just super unique in this fashion, and if you ever try to test him out yourself, feel free to go and do so, right? Now the second question before we wrap up this video is stacking Welt's ultimate action value pushback with his break instance better? Which essentially means is imaginary break compounding with Welt's ultimate? Well, the short answer is no. Whether you use your ultimate with the break or without the break, the action value pushback, they are additive to each other. So this means that if you cast your ultimate with the break or without the break, they won't multiply, right? The action value is still going to be the same. Whether you push back by 25 here and 50 later, or 50 here and 25 later, you're always going to add up to 75. So there is no difference here whatsoever. And I think this is a super straightforward topic, but I just want to get this out of the way. So with that, we've come to the end of our video. I think this was a very interesting mechanic. I didn't really think that it would need a lot of time explaining, but it was just very useful to find out like this is how action value cutting works in this game. So in the future, if we have more units that functions like Welt's ultimate, where you can push back the enemy's value, then make our entire team go before the enemy's next turn, then I think we can come back to this video again in the future. But for now, this is what we have. We only have Welt, and I hope everybody has fun with this character, because I think I'm having a blast using him in all my MOC, all my Simulated Universe runs. So with that, that's all for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.